When my $150,000 life savings vanished without a trace, I texted the family chat in a state of absolute, blind panic. I told them my account was completely wiped out. I told them we had nothing left for rent and that my family was going to be out on the street. Their response? They sent a laughing emoji. Not an hour later, my brother tagged everyone in photos popping champagne on a luxury yacht in the Hamptons. Nobody offered us a single dime. Weeks later, while I was sleeping on a deflating air mattress in a freezing, uninsulated garage, my phone exploded with 150 missed calls and a frantic text from my mother. She wrote that they needed me immediately, that it was just $50,000 to save their house from foreclosure. Without thinking twice, I realized my role as their personal ATM was officially over, and the payback was going to be biblical. Let me take you back to the exact moment my entire world collapsed. It was a Tuesday night, raining the kind of heavy, freezing downpour that chills you straight to the bone. I was standing in the middle of my custom cabinetry shop. The air in the shop always smelled like a mixture of cut pine, strong lacquer, and old dust. It was a smell I usually loved. It was the smell of my hard work, my independence, and my ability to provide for my wife, Marin, and our 6-year-old son, Kale. But that night, the smell of sawdust was completely overpowered by the sharp, acrid stench of burned metal and absolute ruin. I was staring down at a heavy steel square set into the concrete floor of the back office. The floor safe, the door, which should have been impenetrable, was blown wide open. The thick metal around the combination dial had been meticulously torched right through. The edges were still black and warped from the intense heat of an acetylene torch. I dropped to my knees, the rough concrete biting into my jeans, and plunged my calloused, trembling hands into the dark cavity of the safe. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing inside except a fine layer of gray ash and a rusted washer that must have fallen during the break-in. Every single dollar I had bled for over the last 5 years was gone. $150,000. It was entirely in cash and certified business checks. I had pulled it all together to finalize a massive commercial lumber order and to secure the lease on a new, larger workshop across town. I had the money out of the bank because the transition between my old business accounts and the new commercial trust was taking too long, and the lumber supplier demanded immediate upfront payment by the end of the week. It was a calculated risk. A stupid, fatal, agonizing risk. The red and blue lights from the police cruisers parked outside were flashing aggressively through the dusty, rain-streaked windows of the shop. They painted the walls in erratic, blinding strokes of color, illuminating the half-finished oak cabinets I had been working on just hours before. I could not hear the sirens. I could not even hear the heavy boots of the police officers walking around the perimeter, shining their flashlights into the rain. All I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears, the sound of my own blood rushing in sheer terror. Marin stood by the entrance of the office. She had my heavy flannel jacket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her face was so pale she looked like a ghost under the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. She was holding Kale tightly against her leg. My boy was clutching his favorite toy, a little plastic action figure, his small eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. He looked up at me, his voice trembling as the cold draft from the broken back door swept through the room. He asked me if we could go back to our apartment now. He said he was cold and wanted to sleep in his own bed. I had to look away. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I could not look my son in the eye and tell him the truth. I could not tell him that we could not go back to our apartment. Our landlord, a ruthless corporate property manager who also owned the commercial lot my shop was on, had been crystal clear on the phone just 20 minutes ago. Because I had diverted all my funds into the safe to prepare for the business expansion, I was 2 months behind on our residential rent. The second he heard about the robbery, he did not offer sympathy. He sent a crew to padlock our apartment door. He said I was a liability. We were officially, undeniably out on the street. My fingers were numb as I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was an instinct. A stupid, desperate, naive instinct born from years of hoping that family blood actually meant something when the chips were truly down. I opened the group chat, The chat had my mother Vera, my father Harrison, my younger brother Declan, and my sister Daphne. I did not have the energy to type out a long, emotional explanation. I did not want to beg. I just typed the absolute, terrifying reality of my situation. I wrote, the shop was robbed. The safe is empty. All 150,000 is gone. The landlord locked us out of the apartment. We have nothing left for rent. We are on the street. I pressed send. The little green bubble popped up. Delivered. Then, a few seconds later, read. I stood there in the freezing office watching that red receipt. I expected the phone to ring instantly. I expected my mother to gasp in horror, my father to gruffly tell me to pack up Marin and Kale and drive over to their house immediately. I expected Declan to ask if we were physically safe. I waited. The rain hammered against the tin roof. A police officer stepped into the room, handed me a carbon copy of a police report that felt as light and useless as a dead leaf, and walked out. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. The silence from my phone was deafening. Then the device vibrated in my palm. I quickly looked at the cracked screen. It was not a phone call. It was a single message from my mother, Vera. It was a laughing emoji, the one with tears streaming down its bright yellow face. Right beneath that mocking little digital face, she typed a sentence that made my heart physically stop beating for a second. She wrote, pulling another dramatic stunt to get out of paying for the family vacation this weekend. Silas, give it a rest and go to sleep. We are not falling for it. I stood paralyzed, staring at the flashing screen. The cold wind howled through the broken door, but it was nothing compared to the absolute, freezing chill that settled deep into my bones, freezing my lungs. I realized right then, with brutal clarity, that my own flesh and blood had just stepped over the corpse of my entire life's work, and they found it hilarious. Was this really happening? Was I entirely alone in this world? That first night was a masterclass in humiliation. With my business accounts wiped out and my personal credit cards maxed out from buying raw materials the previous month, I could not even afford a cheap motel room. The police officer, seeing the desperation in Marin's eyes, gave us the address of a local church that operated a temporary family shelter. Driving there in my beat-up work truck, the silence in the cab was suffocating. Kale had fallen asleep in his car seat, exhausted from crying. Marin stared out the passenger window at the passing streetlights, her jaw set tight. We arrived at a large, brutalist brick building behind the church. The intake room smelled intensely of industrial bleach, boiled cabbage, and human despair. A tired-looking volunteer handed us 3 thin, scratchy blankets and pointed us toward the main gymnasium. There were dozens of green canvas cots lined up against the painted cinderblock walls. We found a small corner in the back. Marin sat on the edge of a cot, gently laying Kale down and covering him with her coat. She did not yell at me. She did not scream about my decision to keep the cash in the shop safe instead of dealing with the bank's administrative delays. She just sat there, rubbing her temples, looking like she was trying to hold the pieces of her sanity together with sheer willpower. I could not sleep. I paced the scuffed hardwood floor of the gymnasium, listening to the chorus of coughs and restless shifting from the other families. My mind was a chaotic storm of numbers, police reports, and the terrifying reality of having exactly $0 to my name. Out of pure, self-destructive habit, I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened Instagram. I do not know what I was looking for. Maybe I wanted to see if the world had stopped spinning just because mine had violently crashed. The very first post at the top of my feed hit me like a baseball bat to the stomach. It was from my brother, Declan, the golden child of the family, the man who had never worked a hard day in his life. The caption read, "Popping champagne in the Hamptons. Best family weekend ever. Blood is thicker than water." There was a carousel of 4 high-resolution pictures. I swiped to the first one. It was Declan, wearing a crisp, designer linen shirt, holding up a heavy, green bottle of vintage champagne that easily cost more than my entire grocery budget for a month. He was leaning against the polished mahogany railing of a massive, multi-million-dollar rented yacht. Behind him, laughing like they did not have a single care in the universe, were my parents. My mother, Vera, the woman who had just sent me a laughing emoji while I was standing in the ruins of my life, was wearing oversized luxury sunglasses, holding a crystal flute, and throwing her head back in a carefree, extravagant laugh. My father, Harrison, was sitting on a white leather lounge chair, smoking a thick cigar and looking like a billionaire on holiday. My sister, Daphne, was posing in a designer swimsuit at the bow of the boat. They were celebrating. They were drinking top-shelf liquor, eating catered food, and sailing on crystal blue ocean water. And the most sickening part? They were doing it using the exact $5,000 I had transferred to my mother last month. She had called me weeping, claiming the roof of their suburban home was caving in and the insurance would not cover it. I had worked double shifts to secure that cash for her. They had taken my sweat, lied directly to my face, and used it to fund a luxury vacation. I zoomed in on the picture. I stared at their glowing, smiling faces. Then, I looked at the timestamp at the top of the post. It was posted exactly 1 hour after I sent the message telling them I was homeless. 1 hour. I did not throw my phone against the brick wall. I did not scream out in agony. The anger that blossomed inside my chest did not erupt into a fiery, uncontrollable rage. Instead, it turned to solid ice. It froze over my heart, sealing off every single ounce of warmth, love, loyalty, or obligation I had ever felt for the people in those photographs. Marin woke up from her light doze. She saw the pale glow of the phone screen reflecting in my eyes. She leaned over, her shoulder touching mine, and looked at the picture of the yacht. She did not say a single word. She just slowly reached out and closed her hand over my phone, pushing it down. The profound silence between us spoke volumes. We survived in that church shelter for 3 agonizing days before we had to move. The church needed the space for a community event. We ended up in a freezing, uninsulated garage owned by an old high school friend of Marin's who lived 2 towns over. He felt pity for us and let us set up a queen-sized air mattress on the cracked concrete floor, squeezed between towering boxes of dusty Christmas decorations and an old, rusted lawnmower that smelled of stale gasoline. It was utterly humiliating. Every single morning, I woke up with my breath turning to thick white vapor in the freezing air, my lower back screaming in pain from the hard floor. During those endless, miserable weeks in the garage, my phone remained completely, terrifyingly silent. Not a single phone call from my mother to check on her grandson. Not a single text message from my father to offer advice. My brother continued to post daily updates about their extravagant dinners, their shopping sprees in high-end boutiques, and their beachside cocktails. Not one of them reached out to ask if we had a warm place to sleep, or if I had found a way to buy a loaf of bread. They knew exactly where I was. They had read my message. They knew we were in crisis, and they actively, deliberately chose the champagne over us. The toxic, parasitic family dynamic had never been clearer to me. I was not a son. I was not a brother. I was simply a financial resource. And right now, the well was dry, so they discarded the bucket. Laying on that freezing, slowly deflating air mattress night after night, listening to the winter wind rattle the thin aluminum garage door, my mind became a twisted, torturous museum of pain. I could not stop the flashbacks. With nothing but the dark ceiling to stare at, every memory of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and family humiliation played over and over in my head like a broken film projector. Exhibit A in this miserable museum of my past was Declan's sports car. 3 years ago, Declan had decided he wanted to be a broker for luxury vehicles. He convinced my parents that he absolutely needed a high-end Porsche to project an image of success to his potential wealthy clients. It was a business that, to this day, had yet to sell a single vehicle. When the dealership ran his credit and literally laughed him out of the showroom, my parents showed up at my workshop. My mother cried real, wet tears. She said Declan's entire future was on the line. My father put his heavy hand on my shoulder, a rare gesture of physical affection that I was pathetic enough to desperately crave. They told me I had to co-sign the massive auto loan. They said family takes care of family, and that Declan would make the payments himself. I foolishly signed the thick stack of papers. Declan drove the car off the lot, missed the very first payment, and for the last 36 months, I had been quietly draining $800 from my own business account every single month just to keep my personal credit score from tanking. Exhibit B was Daphne's extravagant wedding. She demanded a fairy tale reception at an elite country club she absolutely could not afford. When the final catering bill for $20,000 came due a week before the event, my father called me into his study. He poured a glass of scotch, did not offer me one, and told me it was my fundamental duty as the oldest, successful brother to handle it so my sister would not be embarrassed. I worked 16-hour days for 6 straight months, breathing in toxic lacquer fumes and sanding raw wood until my knuckles cracked and bled, just to pay that bill. At the wedding reception, during the toasts, Daphne took the microphone. She cried gracefully. She thanked our parents for their endless love. She thanked her wealthy new in-laws. And then, she looked right past me, sitting at a small table near the back near the kitchen doors, and thanked Declan for always being her rock, her best friend, and her biggest financial and emotional supporter. She did not mention my name a single time. I paid for the premium steak she was eating, and she acted like I was part of the hired waitstaff. Exhibit C was the constant, degrading, unrelenting disrespect from my father. Harrison was a man who measured a person's worth strictly by corporate titles and bank account sizes, not by character or hard work. He sat comfortably in his large suburban home, a home with a bloated mortgage that I secretly helped pay twice a year when he inevitably fell behind on his taxes, and openly referred to my custom cabinetry business as simple blue-collar labor. To his golfing friends, I was not a master craftsman or a small business owner. I was just the guy who nailed boards together in a dusty shed. He frequently told people while I was standing right there that I lacked the natural ambition and intellect of my brother Declan, the brilliant entrepreneur. An entrepreneur who lived rent-free in their basement and spent my money on designer shoes. 10 years. For an entire decade, I had been the family's ultimate safety net. I was the emergency fund they never felt the need to replenish. I was the invisible load-bearing support beam holding up a grand house built entirely on lies, debt, and narcissistic entitlement. Whenever they needed quick cash, I was suddenly the loyal, dependable son. But whenever I needed basic respect, or even just a simple thank you without strings attached, I was immediately gaslit and told I was being too sensitive or making things about myself. Laying in the pitch-black garage, shivering under a thin blanket next to my wife and son, I felt a profound, crystal-clear sense of clarity wash over me. The revenge I wanted was not going to be a loud, screaming argument. It was not going to be a tearful confrontation where I begged them to understand my pain. It was going to be total, permanent, absolute silence. They had spent years treating me like a mindless machine that only existed to print money for their convenience and social status. But the machine was broken now. The fire of my ambition had been stolen, leaving nothing but cold ash. And I swore to myself, pressing my face into the freezing mattress, that even if I ever managed to rebuild that machine, they would never, ever get to press the buttons again. The Bank of Silas was closed forever. But how exactly was I going to survive the winter? Salvation, when it finally arrived, did not come from anyone sharing my bloodline. It came from a man who owed me absolutely nothing, yet gave me everything. 2 weeks into our miserable stay in that freezing garage, the heavy beam of headlights pierced the darkness of the narrow driveway. I stepped out into the biting winter night, my breath pluming in the freezing air like thick smoke, to see an old, heavily dented Ford truck park aggressively near the curb. The driver's side door creaked open, and Tobias, my father-in-law, stepped out into the rain. Tobias was a retired industrial mechanic, a man of very few words, with rough, scarred hands that looked just as battered and calloused as my own. He had driven 4 straight hours through a dangerous storm from his small home in the rural suburbs after Marin finally broke down and called him from a gas station payphone, sobbing uncontrollably. Tobias walked up the driveway. He did not give me a pitying look. He did not shake his head. He did not ask how I could have been so incredibly stupid to leave that much cash in a floor safe instead of dealing with the bank's red tape. He just walked right up to me, reached deep into the pocket of his heavy, grease-stained denim jacket, and pulled out a large ring of heavy brass keys. He pressed the cold metal firmly into my palm, wrapping my fingers around them. He looked me dead in the eye, his gaze steady and hard, and said, "This is the key to my old machine shop out on Route 9. The equipment is ancient, the roof leaks in the back, but the power works and the saws still run. You have two good hands, Silas. That dirt is yours to stand on. Go start over." I nearly broke down and wept right there in the wet gravel. The jarring, violent contrast between my own parents laughing at my utter ruin from the deck of a luxury yacht, and this quiet man driving through a midnight storm to literally hand me his entire livelihood, was sharp enough to slice right through my chest. We packed our 3 black garbage bags full of donated clothes and Cale's few remaining toys into the flatbed of his old truck. We drove out of the city and moved into the small, dusty, one-bedroom apartment situated directly above Tobias's old machine shop. It was certainly not a palace. It smelled perpetually of old engine grease, stale cigarettes, and sawdust. But it had a working floor heater, a solid roof that did not leak over the bed, and it felt like absolute pure heaven compared to the concrete floor of that garage. I threw myself into the work with a manic, desperate energy. I spent the first week cleaning the heavy rust off Tobias's old table saws, recalibrating the industrial planers, and going door to door taking absolutely any odd job I could find. I built cheap, functional shelving units for local corner bodegas. I repaired broken, splintered dining chairs for old ladies in the neighborhood for $20 a pop. I worked from the moment the sun came up until my muscles screamed and my hands cramped, using the intense physical pain of the labor to actively drown out the emotional betrayal of my family. I deleted all social media apps from my phone. I blocked my mother, my father, and my siblings on every single platform. I severed the digital threads, making myself a complete ghost to them. It was during this grueling period of rebuilding that I met Gideon. Gideon was a private investigator and an independent asset recovery specialist who operated out of a small office downtown. He came into my shop one rainy afternoon holding a completely shattered, beautifully intricate antique cedar humidor box, asking if the wood could somehow be salvaged. We got to talking. I liked him immediately. He had an incredibly sharp, analytical mind, a cynical sense of humor, and a no-nonsense way of speaking that cut straight to the point. Over a cup of terrible, bitter diner coffee later that week, I found myself telling Gideon the entire story of the burglary. I told him about the professionally torched safe, the missing $150,000 in cash and checks, and the highly suspicious, incredibly convenient timing of the corporate landlord locking me out just hours after the police left the scene. Gideon listened quietly, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the sticky Formica table. He looked at me, a sharp, predatory glint suddenly appearing in his eyes, and said, "Silas, my friend, you are a great carpenter, but you are naive. That much cash does not just magically walk away in the middle of the night without an inside man knowing exactly when the bank transfer was supposed to happen. Let me look into this. You fix my humidor perfectly, and you repanel my office walls with that dark mahogany I saw in your shop, and we will call it a completely fair trade." I agreed immediately. I had literally nothing left to lose. I spent the next 2 weeks carefully, meticulously restoring his antique box, filling every crack with precision, and installing beautiful wainscoting in his office. I did not expect much to come of his investigation. I had already forced myself to accept that the money was gone forever, swallowed up by the unforgiving universe as a harsh, permanent tax for my own trusting stupidity. But I vastly underestimated Gideon. I underestimated how loud the truth can be when someone actually possesses the skills to dig for it. Would he actually find the ghost who stole my life? Exactly 1 month later, Gideon called me on my cell phone and told me to come to his newly paneled office immediately. When I walked in, he was sitting behind his heavy oak desk, a thick, bulging manila folder resting squarely under his hands. He pushed the folder across the polished wood toward me. "Open it," he commanded, his voice perfectly flat, but his dark eyes gleaming with an intense, professional satisfaction. I opened the heavy file. Inside were stacks of printed emails, grainy but clear security camera footage, stills from a building across the street, and highly confidential offshore bank transfer records. It took me a full minute to process what the documents were showing. When I finally put the pieces together, the shock was so profound my knees went weak and I had to sit down heavily in the leather guest chair. The burglary was a complete inside job. It was executed flawlessly by the senior property manager of my old commercial lot. He had unrestricted access to the master keys. He knew the exact blind spots of the security cameras because he installed them, and most importantly, he knew I was keeping a massive amount of cash on site to negotiate the new, larger lease he had been trying to block. Gideon, through methods he refused to fully explain, had tracked a sudden, massive, unexplained crypto deposit into an offshore account directly linked to the manager's brother-in-law. The digital evidence was absolutely irrefutable. But Gideon had not just found the thief. He had bypassed the slow-moving police department entirely and taken the explosive evidence directly to the commercial property owner's massive corporate insurance company. He sat in a boardroom and threatened them with a highly public, multi-million-dollar lawsuit for gross negligence, internal security failures, and corporate theft. The insurance company executives panicked. They wanted the potential scandal buried immediately before the press or the authorities caught wind of a rogue employee stealing from tenants. "Silas," Gideon said, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. "The property manager is currently packing his bags for a very long federal vacation. Your original money was technically recovered during the freeze. But more importantly, the insurance company has agreed to a quiet, extremely fast settlement to ensure you never speak of this to anyone." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a single piece of heavy stock paper. It was a formal settlement agreement. I looked down at the number printed clearly on the bottom line. It was not $150,000. It was $500,000. $500,000. Tax-free, legally cleared, and scheduled to be wire transferred directly into a secure, blind trust account Gideon had already helped set up under Marin's maiden name. I walked out of Gideon's office that afternoon a genuinely wealthy man. But walking down the crowded city street, I did not feel rich. I felt dangerous. I felt like a loaded weapon. I did not go buy a new truck. I did not buy fancy clothes or a massive house. Marin and I agreed to keep living quietly in the small apartment above Tobias's shop, putting the money into high-yield, safe investments to work slowly and quietly behind the scenes. We told absolutely no one. As far as the rest of the world knew, and especially as far as my blood relatives knew, I was still the broke, homeless, pathetic loser who had lost everything and vanished into the gutter. 7 weeks had passed since the night of the robbery. 7 agonizing weeks of absolute, suffocating, cruel silence from the people who raised me. We were sitting around the small, scratched kitchen table in the apartment. Tobias was patiently showing Cale how to carve a small wooden boat out of a block of soft pine. Marin was cooking a simple pasta dinner on the stove. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was what a real, actual family was supposed to feel like. Suddenly, my phone, which was resting face down on the kitchen counter, lit up brightly. It started vibrating violently against the formica. Then it buzzed again, and again. It did not stop. It was a continuous, frantic, uninterrupted stream of notifications. I walked over slowly and picked it up. The screen showed an unbelievable number. 150 missed calls. Every single one of them was from the family group chat. There were missed calls from my mother, my father, and Declan. Then, a text message popped up right in the center of the screen, bypassing the blocked settings because it came through a new number. It was from Vera. "Silas, pick up the damn phone right now. We need you immediately. Dad made a terrible investment and the bank is threatening immediate foreclosure on the house. It is just $50,000 to save it from the auction block. Stop being so incredibly selfish, answer me, and transfer the funds." I stood perfectly still, staring at the glowing screen. I read the words "stop being so incredibly selfish" over and over again until the letters blurred. They had completely ignored my existence when I was sleeping on a freezing concrete floor. They had literally sent a laughing emoji at my financial ruin. They had drank imported champagne on a yacht while my 6-year-old son shivered in a damp garage. And now, the very second their own reckless, arrogant spending caught up with them, I was suddenly supposed to magically reappear and be their savior. I was just an ATM that they were furiously punching buttons on, hoping desperately that cash would spit out. I looked at the message demanding $50,000. The corners of my mouth slowly turned up. It was not a happy smile. It was a cold, calculating, terrifying grin that made Marin pause her cooking, wipe her hands on her apron, and look at me with a mix of awe and slight fear. The massive, inescapable trap they had so arrogantly built for themselves had finally, violently snapped shut. I did not answer the frantic text message. I did not call my mother back to listen to her performative, fake crying. I did not respond to the absolute barrage of rising panic vibrating in my hand. Instead, I walked purposefully over to my old, battered laptop sitting on the far end of the kitchen counter. I flipped the screen open, logged onto the highly secure Wi-Fi network Gideon had installed for me, and opened my primary banking portal. For 10 long, exhausting years, my financial life had been a deeply tangled, parasitic web of obligations to my family. My name was permanently attached to their debts like a leech I could never manage to shake off. But today, I was not just shaking them off. I was using a scalpel. First, I navigated to the joint checking account I still technically shared with my mother. This was the specific account I used to fund every month, the one she blatantly used as her personal slush fund for designer clothes, expensive salon visits, and luxury lunches with her friends, constantly claiming it was just for essential groceries. The balance was currently hovering near zero because I had stopped depositing my hard-earned cash 2 months ago. I clicked on the Account Management tab. I scrolled down to Authorized Users. I found her name, Vera, and selected Remove User. The banking system popped up a warning box asking for final confirmation. I clicked Yes with extreme prejudice. The digital tie was permanently severed. Next, I opened the Credit Card Management portal. Declan was listed as a premium authorized user on my oldest, most established credit card, a platinum card with a massive limit that single-handedly bolstered his absolutely terrible credit score. He used it constantly to pay for his fancy dinners downtown to impress non-existent wealthy clients. I navigated directly to his profile. I clicked Cancel Card immediately. The system processed the request with a satisfying loading circle. Declan's magic plastic money was now officially a useless, deactivated piece of trash. Good luck buying the next round of drinks, little brother. Then I tackled the biggest, heaviest anchor of all. Daphne's luxury high-rise apartment. I had stupidly co-signed her expensive lease a year ago because her actual income as a part-time yoga instructor was a complete joke to the leasing office. I found the digital portal for her aggressive property management company. I uploaded a formal, legally binding document Gideon had drafted for me earlier that week, officially withdrawing my name as a financial guarantor due to severe personal financial hardship, aggressively leveraging a specific exit clause we found buried in the fine print of the contract. Once that document was processed by their automated system, Daphne would receive an automated email giving her exactly 48 hours to come up with a new, qualified guarantor, or deposit a massive $6,000 in cash or face immediate, unceremonious eviction. I hit the Submit button. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, listening to the low, steady hum of the old refrigerator. The pale blue glow of the laptop screen softly illuminated my face. I was systematically, ruthlessly dismantling the false reality they had built on my back, one single click at a time. The sharp clicking sound of the computer mouse felt like heavy, iron vault doors slamming shut in a prison, locking them entirely out of my life forever. The phone resting on the counter buzzed violently again. Another message popped up, this time from Declan. Bro, what the hell is going on? Mom's card just got publicly declined at the grocery store. My platinum card is showing invalid. Call us back right now, this is not funny. I picked up the phone. I did not type a witty response. I did not try to explain myself. I went straight into the core settings. I selected block contact for Declan. I did the exact same for Vera. I did the exact same for Harrison. I did the exact same for Daphne. I set the phone face down on the counter. The silence in the room was absolute and beautiful. I walked over to the small kitchen table, pulled out a wobbly wooden chair, and sat down right next to Marin and Kale. Marin looked at me, raising one eyebrow in a silent, deeply knowing question. I took a massive, deep breath, filling my lungs with clean air. The crushing, suffocating weight of obligation that had been sitting directly on my chest for a decade was suddenly, miraculously gone. I felt lighter. I felt genuinely free for the first time in my adult life. I looked at my wife and smiled, a real, genuine, warm smile this time. I looked at her and said, "Dinner smells absolutely amazing. Let's eat." The bomb had been quietly planted under their house of cards. The fuse had burned all the way down to the powder. And somewhere across town, in a suburban house facing aggressive foreclosure and a luxury apartment facing immediate eviction, the massive shockwave was about to hit them with the force of a freight train. I was finally going to let them drown in the very same freezing, dark waters they had so easily left me to die in. If you are enjoying this story of ultimate family revenge, please hit that like button and subscribe to the Payback Diaries. Before we move to the explosive fallout in next part, drop a comment below with the name of the city you are watching from. Every comment helps push this video to more people who need to hear it. Thank you so much for your support. The immediate fallout of severing my financial ties was not a loud explosion. It was a creeping, suffocating silence followed by a tidal wave of sheer, unadulterated panic. For 3 days after I clicked those buttons on my laptop, I completely ignored the outside world. I did not check my blocked voicemails. I did not look at my hidden emails. I just woke up early, drank my coffee with Marin, kissed my son Kale on the forehead, and went downstairs to the machine shop to work on the beautiful, solid oak cabinets I was building for a new client. The heavy, rhythmic sound of the table saw cutting through wood was the only therapy I needed. The toxic family drama that had defined my entire adult life was finally locked outside my door, and I was holding the only key. But rats always find a way to claw their way out of a sinking ship. It was a gloomy Thursday afternoon. The sky outside was a bruised purple, threatening another heavy downpour. I was standing at my workbench, carefully sanding the edges of a custom mahogany drawer front, when the heavy, rusted metal door of the shop violently screeched open. The sudden noise echoed loudly over the hum of the ventilation fans. I slowly turned off my sander, the motor whining down to a stop, and wiped the sawdust from my hands with an old rag. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the gray afternoon light, was my younger brother, Declan, the golden child, the brilliant entrepreneur. But he did not look brilliant today. He looked entirely destroyed. He was wearing the same expensive designer linen shirt he had been wearing in those photos from the luxury yacht in the Hamptons, but now it was deeply wrinkled and stained near the collar. His perfectly styled hair was a messy, greasy nest. There were heavy, dark bags under his eyes, and his hands were physically shaking as he stood there staring at me. He looked around the dusty, grease-stained machine shop, his nose wrinkling in absolute disgust, before his eyes finally locked onto mine. "Bro, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and desperate confusion. He stormed across the concrete floor, kicking up a small cloud of sawdust. I did not move. I just leaned back against my sturdy oak workbench, crossed my arms over my chest, and looked at him with the cold, detached curiosity you might reserve for a stray dog digging through your trash. "What does it look like I am doing, Declan?" I replied, my voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion whatsoever. "I am working. Something you should probably look into." He stopped a few feet away from me, breathing heavily. "You blocked us. You blocked all our numbers. Do you have any idea what is happening right now? Mom was at the luxury grocery store yesterday. She had a cart full of food and wine, and her card was declined. In front of everyone, she called me sobbing hysterically. And when I tried to use my platinum card to pay for a client dinner last night, the waiter brought it back cut in half. They said the account was permanently closed." He threw his hands up in the air, a gesture of pure, entitled outrage. And Daphne just called me screaming. The leasing office at her high-rise complex gave her an eviction notice this morning because her guarantor magically disappeared from the system. She has 48 hours to come up with $6,000 or she is on the street. Have you lost your damn mind? Silas? Turn the accounts back on right now. I let him finish his little tantrum. I watched his face turn red, watched the veins bulge in his neck as he demanded that I return to my rightful place as the family ATM. It was truly a spectacular display of absolute delusion. He genuinely believed that I was just throwing a temporary fit, that I could be bullied back into submission with a few raised voices and a guilt trip. I slowly walked over to him, closing the distance until I was standing right in his face. I was taller than him, broader from years of heavy physical labor, and for the first time in his pampered life, he actually looked intimidated by me. He took a half step back. "Declan," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and quiet. "Exactly 2 months ago, my entire life savings was wiped out in a targeted robbery. $150,000 of my hard-earned money vanished. I was evicted by a ruthless landlord. My 6-year-old son was put out on the freezing street. I sent a message to the family chat, begging for a single shred of sympathy or a place to sleep." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, forcing him to hold my gaze. "Do you remember what happened next, little brother?" I asked. "Do you remember what our loving mother sent me?" She sent a laughing emoji. "And exactly 1 hour later, you posted photos of all of you popping imported champagne on a yacht that was paid for with my sweat. You drank to family loyalty while I slept on a deflating air mattress in a freezing, uninsulated garage." Declan swallowed hard. His face immediately lost its angry red color and turned an ashen, sickly white. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The arrogant bravado was melting off him like cheap wax near a fire. "So no, Declan," I continued, my voice as cold as absolute zero. "I have not lost my mind. I have finally found it. The bank is permanently closed. I am not paying for your fake lifestyle. I am not paying for Daphne's luxury apartment. And I am certainly not paying to save the house of a woman who laughed at my financial ruin. Now, get out of my shop before I throw you out myself." He stood there, trembling, his eyes darting frantically around the room, as if searching for a hidden camera or an escape route from this brutal reality. He realized, perhaps for the very first time, that the endless river of money had completely dried up. "But wait," he stammered, raising his shaking hands in a defensive gesture. "Silas, please, you have to listen to me. It was not like that. We did not know." I let out a short, harsh laugh. "You did not know? You read the message, Declan. I saw the read receipts." He shook his head frantically. "No, I mean, we read it, but Mom and Dad told me you were faking it. They told me you were just putting on a dramatic show so you would not have to chip in for the Hamptons trip." I froze. The cold ice around my heart cracked just a fraction, letting in a single, sharp needle of pure poison. I stared at him, my muscles tensing. "What did you just say?" He looked down at his expensive, ruined shoes, his voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. "They told me you were lying. They stopped me from coming to get you." I stood completely paralyzed. The air suddenly sucked out of the room. The true depth of their betrayal was just beginning to reveal itself, and it was darker than I had ever imagined. The heavy silence in the machine shop was suddenly suffocating. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic dripping of a leaky pipe in the corner. I stood perfectly still, my fists clenched so tightly at my sides that my knuckles were completely white. I stared at Declan, trying to process the absolute venom of what he had just confessed. My own parents did not just ignore my plea for help. They actively, maliciously convinced my brother that my total financial ruin was a manipulative lie. "Say that again," I demanded, my voice barely more than a rough whisper. "Say exactly what they told you on that night." Declan looked terrified. He nervously licked his dry lips and took another step back, instinctively sensing the dangerous energy radiating from me. "I was at the house when your text came through," he began, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "I was packing my bags for the trip. I saw the message. I saw that you said the safe was empty and you were out on the street. Panicked, Silas. I really did. I grabbed my car keys. I told Mom and Dad that we needed to drive over to the shop immediately to pick up you, Marin, and Kale. He paused, running a shaking hand through his messy hair. And I pushed, stepping closer to him. And Dad physically blocked the front door, Declan said, a tear of genuine distress finally spilling over his eyelid. Dad told me to put my keys down. He said, and I quote, "Do not feed into his pathetic drama, Declan. Silas is just throwing a tantrum because he knows we asked him to cover the yacht rental deposit tomorrow. He is lying about the robbery to get out of his obligations to this family." I felt physically sick. My stomach violently churned. The level of narcissistic delusion required to read a message about a family member being on the street and immediately assume it was a plot to avoid paying for a luxury boat was beyond human comprehension. "And Mom?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Mom agreed with him, Declan whimpered, wiping his face. She laughed. She literally laughed out loud in the kitchen. She pulled out her phone and said she was going to call your bluff. That is when she sent the laughing emoji. She told me that if I drove over to get you, I would just be enabling your toxic behavior. She said if we ignored you, you would eventually give up the act, apologize, and wire the money for the boat by morning. I stood there, absorbing the absolute, staggering weight of their cruelty. They had projected their own manipulative, toxic behavior onto me. Because they used lies and guilt to extract money from people, they assumed I was doing the exact same thing. They let their 6-year-old grandson sleep in a freezing garage because they were entirely consumed by their own greedy vanity. I believed them, Silas, Declan cried, his facade completely shattering into pathetic pieces. I am so sorry. I am so incredibly stupid. I saw the news report about the robbery on local television 3 days later while we were in the Hamptons. I knew then that it was real. I knew you had lost everything. My eyes narrowed into dark, dangerous slits. You knew 3 days later? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. You knew I was really homeless while you were still on that yacht? Declan nodded miserably, unable to look me in the eye. And yet, you never called, I stated, laying out the absolute, undeniable facts. You never sent a single text to apologize. You kept posting pictures of yourself drinking champagne. You came back from the Hamptons and went right back to using the credit card I was breaking my back to pay for. You did not say a single word until the exact moment your magic plastic money stopped working. He had no response. He just stood there, weeping quietly, completely exposed for the selfish, hollow coward he truly was. The family payback was not just about the money anymore. It was about exposing the absolute moral bankruptcy of my bloodline. I do not want your tears, Declan, I said. My voice as hard as the concrete floor beneath our feet. I do not want your apologies. You made your choice. You chose the champagne. You chose the lies. Now, you get to live with the consequences of being an adult who has to pay for his own dinners. Please, Silas, he begged, falling to his knees right there in the sawdust. I have nothing. I cannot survive out there. I will work for you. I will sweep the floors here. Just turn the card back on so I can eat. Look at me, I commanded. He slowly raised his tear-stained face. I do not care if you starve, Declan. I do not care if Daphne gets evicted and has to sleep in her car. I do not care if the bank takes Mom and Dad's house and bulldozes it to the ground. You are all dead to me. Now get the hell out of my shop. He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment, realizing that the bridge was not just burned, it was completely vaporized. Slowly, he pushed himself up from the floor. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his wrinkled designer shirt, defeated. As he turned to walk toward the heavy rusted door, he stopped. He reached into his back pocket with a trembling hand and pulled out a thick, white, sealed envelope. He did not turn around to face me. He just gently tossed the envelope onto a nearby stack of raw lumber. Mom told me to give you this if you were being stubborn, he said, his voice hollow and defeated. She said to tell you that Dad is not well, that this is not a game anymore. Without another word, Declan walked out the door, pulling it shut behind him. The heavy metal clanged shut, plunging the shop back into the quiet hum of the ventilation fans. I stood alone in the center of the room, staring at the stark white envelope resting on the wood, a cold sense of dread slowly pooling in my stomach. What final, desperate lie had they constructed now? I did not touch the envelope immediately. I let it sit there on the stack of raw lumber like a venomous snake preparing to strike. I turned my back to it, walked over to my workbench, and forcefully turned the loud sander back on. I pressed the spinning sandpaper against a block of scrap wood, letting the aggressive vibration numb my hands and the loud noise drown out the chaotic thoughts racing through my brain. But after 20 minutes of mindless destruction, I finally shut the machine off. The silence rushed back in, demanding attention. I walked over to the woodpile, my boots heavy against the concrete. I picked up the pristine white envelope. It was thick, heavy, and lacked any postage. It had my name, Silas, written in my mother's elegant, sweeping cursive handwriting right across the front. The very sight of her handwriting sent a sharp spike of anger directly through my chest. I tore the seal open with my thumb and pulled out a thick stack of folded documents. I expected another long, manipulative letter filled with fake tears and twisted guilt trips about how I was tearing the family apart. But there was no letter on top. Instead, the first page was a highly detailed medical billing statement. The logo at the top belonged to the Premier Oncology Center at the city's largest private hospital. I scanned the lines of medical jargon, my eyes immediately locking onto the patient name, Harrison, my father. My heart skipped a strange, irregular beat. I quickly flipped to the next page. It was a pathology report, filled with dense, terrifying medical terms. But the bold conclusion at the bottom of the page was written in plain, inescapable English. Stage 3 aggressive lymphoma. I flipped through the rest of the pages. There were schedules for intense radiation therapy, quotes for specialized chemotherapy drugs that insurance was refusing to fully cover, and a massive, staggering final estimated bill for out-of-pocket expenses. The total was exactly $48,500. At the very bottom of the stack, there was a small, pale yellow sticky note attached to a final hospital demand letter. It was written in my mother's handwriting. It read, "This is why we need the $50,000 immediately. The bank is going to take the house because we spent our mortgage money trying to save his life. If you do not transfer the funds today, his treatment stops on Monday. Are you really going to let your own father die over a stupid grudge about a robbery, you cold-blooded monster?" I stood perfectly frozen in the middle of the shop, the papers trembling slightly in my calloused hands. The air suddenly felt incredibly thin. My father had stage 3 cancer. The man who had constantly belittled me, the man who had ordered my brother to abandon me on the street, was fighting for his life. And my mother, the architect of this entire toxic family dynamic, was brilliantly using his terminal illness as a loaded gun, pointing it directly at my head to extort the money they desperately needed. This was the ultimate plot twist in their twisted game of family revenge. If I refused to give them the money, I would forever be the evil, sociopathic son who maliciously let his father die out of sheer spite. I would have to live with that dark stain on my conscience for the rest of my life. But if I wired that $50,000 into my mother's bank account, I would be completely surrendering. I would be validating their horrific abuse. And worse, I knew deep in my bones that if I gave Vera that cash, at least half of it would immediately go to paying off the overdue mortgage and her luxury credit cards, not to the hospital. I paced the length of the shop, the heavy medical papers clutched in my fist. I thought about Marin, sleeping upstairs in our small apartment. I thought about Kale, happily carving a wooden boat with Tobias. I thought about the 150 missed calls, the laughing emoji, and the photos of the champagne on the yacht. I walked over to the small, grimy window facing the street. The rain had finally started to fall, washing the dirt from the glass. I realized in that quiet moment that true power is not about screaming. It is not about throwing punches. True power is absolute, cold control over your own boundaries. I was not going to let Harrison die. Despite his unimaginable cruelty, I was not a murderer. I was not a monster, but I was also never ever going to let Vera touch a single cent of my money again. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed a number. The phone rang twice before a familiar, sharp voice answered. "Gideon," I said, staring out at the gray, rainy street. "I need another massive favor, and I need it executed within the next 3 hours." "What do you need, Silas?" the investigator asked smoothly. "I need you to contact the billing department at the City Oncology Center," I instructed, my voice calm, precise, and completely devoid of any hesitation. "I need you to use the blind trust you set up for me to anonymously pay the exact remaining balance of Harrison's medical bills. Every single penny directly to the hospital. No middlemen. But under no circumstances is the patient or his wife allowed to know the source of the funds. They only get a receipt showing the balance is zero." There was a brief pause on the line. Then, Gideon let out a low, appreciative whistle. "A direct surgical strike," Gideon noted. "You save the life, but you starve the leech. The house still goes into foreclosure because they do not get the cash in hand. I love it. Consider it done, my friend. I will have the final paid receipt message to your phone in an hour." I hung up the phone. I looked down at the manipulative yellow sticky note my mother had written. I crumpled it into a tight ball and tossed it directly into the trash can. The decision was made. The bloodline was forever altered. Now it was time to deliver the final blow in person. The oncology ward of the private hospital smelled exactly like the temporary shelter I had slept in months ago. A heavy, suffocating mix of industrial bleach and quiet, desperate fear. I walked down the brightly lit corridor, my heavy work boots making a soft thudding sound against the pristine linoleum floor. I was not wearing a suit. I was wearing my dusty jeans, a faded flannel shirt, and a heavy canvas jacket. I was exactly who I had always been, the working man. I checked the room numbers until I found the right door. Room 412. I did not knock. I placed my hand on the handle, took one final, deep breath, and pushed the door open. The scene inside the private room was exactly as dramatic as I expected. Harrison was lying in the elevated hospital bed, looking significantly older, frilier, and incredibly pale under the harsh lighting. And 4-drip was connected to the back of his hand. Sitting in a plush leather chair next to the bed was my mother, Vera. She was wearing a dark, elegant designer dress, looking more like she was attending a wealthy funeral than supporting a sick husband. Standing near the window was Declan, scrolling anxiously on his phone. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, all 3 of their heads snapped up. When Vera saw me standing there, her eyes instantly widened. A brilliant, terrifying flash of pure greed and absolute triumph lit up her face. She genuinely thought I had broken. She thought the guilt had successfully crushed me and I was there to deliver the cash. "Silas," she cried out, her voice a perfect imitation of a heartbroken, relieved mother. She immediately stood up and rushed toward me, her arms outstretched to pull me into a fake embrace. "Oh, thank God you came to your senses. We have been completely out of our minds with worry. The bank called again this morning. We need the transfer." I did not step back. I simply raised my right hand, my palm facing outward, stopping her dead in her tracks. The cold, impenetrable look in my eyes must have been terrifying, because she physically recoiled, her arms dropping back to her sides. "Do not touch me," I said. The words were not yelled. They were spoken with the quiet, deadly calm of a judge delivering a final sentence. Harrison shifted weakly in his bed, groaning. "Silas," he croaked, his voice lacking its usual booming authority. "Have some respect. Your mother is going through a terrible ordeal. We need that $50,000 right now." I slowly walked past Vera and stood at the foot of my father's hospital bed. I reached into the inside pocket of my canvas jacket and pulled out a single, folded piece of thick white paper. It was the confirmation document Gideon had securely messaged me, which I had printed at the shop. I looked directly into my father's tired, sunken eyes. I did not feel pity. I did not feel anger. I felt absolutely nothing. "You had Declan abandon me on the street because you thought I was manipulating you for boat money," I said clearly, my voice ringing out in the quiet hospital room. You laughed while my son slept on a concrete floor. You lied, you stole, and you treated me like a mindless machine built solely for your convenience. I placed the folded paper down on the rolling tray table next to his bed. But I am not you, Harrison, I continued. I am not a monster who lets people die for the sake of a vacation. Vera quickly snatched the paper off the tray, her eyes scanning the document frantically. She read the hospital logo, the patient name, and the final bolded stamp at the bottom. Paid in full. Balance 0. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You paid it? She whispered, completely shocked. You actually paid the hospital directly? Yes, I said coldly. The medical debt is entirely cleared. The treatment continues. Declan let out a massive, audible sigh of relief from the corner. Thank God, he muttered. But the relief on Vera's face only lasted for a fraction of a second before a new, much darker panic set in. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with frantic realization. Wait, she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the receipt. You paid the hospital directly through a trust? But what about the cash? What about the $50,000 for the house? The bank is foreclosing on Monday. Silas, you have to wire us the cash immediately to save the house. I looked at her, a slow, icy smile spreading across my face. It was the ultimate power move. I am not saving your house, Vera, I said, my voice dripping with absolute finality. I saved his life because it was the morally right thing to do. But I am not saving your lifestyle. I am not saving the roof over your heads. You lied about needing money for a roof repair to go to the Hamptons. Now you can go live in the Hamptons. You cannot do this, she screamed, her carefully constructed facade completely shattering. She stepped toward me, her face contorted in pure, ugly rage. We are your family. You have $500,000 from that insurance settlement. Declan told me, you can easily afford to pay off our mortgage. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match hers. I just looked at her with total clinical detachment. I have a family, I corrected her quietly. I have a wife who stood by me when I had absolutely nothing. I have a son who I will protect with my last breath. And I have a father-in-law who gave me the shirt off his back when my own blood sent me a laughing emoji. I turned back to look at Harrison, who was staring at me in stunned, defeated silence. I bought your life today, old man, I said. And with that purchase, every single debt, every single obligation, every single drop of blood between us is permanently washed away. I do not owe you a single text, a single phone call, or a single glance ever again. Do not ever try to contact me. I turned around and began walking toward the heavy door. Silas, come back here right now, Vera shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the sterile walls. You selfish, ungrateful bastard. You cannot let them take our house. I reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the brightly lit hallway. I did not look back. I let the heavy door swing shut, completely cutting off her frantic screaming. I walked down the hospital corridor, my boots thudding against the floor. As I pushed through the front sliding glass doors of the lobby and stepped out into the crisp, cool afternoon air, I paused. The rain had finally stopped. The sun was breaking through the thick clouds. Somewhere in the distance, sitting in a small tree near the parking lot, I heard a bird singing. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I was finally truly free. 2 entire years have passed since the day I walked out of that hospital room and closed the heavy door on my past. 2 years since I permanently severed the cancerous, toxic roots of my family tree and decided to plant my own seeds in entirely new soil. The aftermath for my former family was exactly as brutal and unforgiving as I had promised. I did not actively seek out information about their downfall, but when a massive explosion happens in your old neighborhood, you inevitably hear the distant sirens. Through passing comments from old acquaintances and the occasional, highly entertaining update from Gideon, I learned exactly what happened. Without my endless stream of emergency cash to plug the massive holes in their sinking ship, The bank ruthlessly foreclosed on Harrison and Vera's sprawling suburban home exactly 1 month after I paid the medical bill. They were violently evicted, their luxury furniture sold off at a public auction to cover the remaining massive debts. They were forced to move into a tiny, incredibly cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the far, undesirable edge of the city. Harrison's cancer went into full remission thanks to the treatments I funded, but he now spends his days sitting in a cheap recliner, stewing in bitterness, his precious ego permanently shattered by his complete loss of wealthy status. Declan, the brilliant golden child who was too good for honest labor, completely collapsed when his platinum credit card was deactivated. Without the ability to buy expensive dinners and fake a lifestyle of extreme success, his imaginary brokerage business instantly evaporated. The last I heard, he is currently working incredibly long hours as a waiter at a mid-tier chain restaurant downtown, forced to actually bow his head and serve the very same people he used to arrogantly pretend he was better than. And Daphne, my wonderful sister who could not even bring herself to thank me at the wedding I entirely paid for, was unceremoniously thrown out of her luxury high-rise apartment exactly 48 hours after I pulled my name from her lease. She had to move into a small, miserable basement suite with her new husband, whose wealthy parents suddenly cut them off when they realized Daphne's family was completely broke. As for me, I took a radically different path. I took the $500,000 insurance settlement and used it exactly how a man who has lost everything should. Carefully, strategically, and with a vision for true permanence. Marin and I did not blow the money on flashy cars or luxury vacations. We used a portion of it to officially buy the entire commercial lot and the old machine shop from Tobias at a very fair, generous market price, allowing him to retire comfortably to a small fishing cabin he always wanted. I gutted the old shop, fully renovated it, and expanded my custom cabinetry business into a high-end, incredibly successful interior design and custom fabrication firm. But our greatest achievement is sitting 10 miles outside the city limits. We bought 5 beautiful green acres of raw land. For the last 18 months, I have spent every single weekend out there with Marin, Kale, and Tobias, building our dream home entirely from the ground up. It is a stunning, sprawling modern farmhouse. The floors are made of thick, reclaimed oak that I personally milled and sanded until my hands were raw. The massive kitchen cabinets are my absolute masterpiece, built with the exact same passion I used to survive the darkest days of my life. Kale is 8 years old now. He has a massive bedroom painted the exact shade of blue he picked out, with a huge window overlooking a wide-open field where he runs with our new golden retriever. He does not remember the freezing garage. He does not remember the terrifying night the safe was robbed. He only knows safety, warmth, and absolute stability. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is completely quiet and I am sitting on the back porch looking up at the stars, I think about the profound philosophy of destruction. Sometimes, to build a truly solid, unbreakable foundation for your life, you cannot just paint over the existing rot. You have to let the infested, decaying structure burn to the ground, or watch it completely vanish into thin air, and you have to find the incredible strength to sweep the ashes away and start over with completely clean hands. My hands are permanently scarred now. They are thick and calloused, but they built a fortress that no one can ever take away from me. But the past always has a funny way of trying to violently knock on a locked door. Just 3 days ago, I was sitting in my newly paneled office at the shop, reviewing the incredibly profitable quarterly numbers, when a new email popped into my business inbox. It managed to bypass my personal blocks because it was sent from a brand new, generic email address. The subject line simply read, "I am sorry. Please read this." I clicked on the email. It was a massive, sprawling, 5-paragraph message from my brother, Declan. He detailed his complete financial ruin. He wrote about the absolute misery of his minimum wage job. He actually apologized, using clear, unambiguous words, for abandoning me on the night of the robbery, for the Hamptons photos, and for acting like an entitled parasite his entire life. At the very bottom of the email, he made his desperate pitch. He said he was completely broke and facing eviction from his cheap apartment. He begged me for a job. He said he would sweep the sawdust off the floors of my shop. He said he would clean the toilets. He just desperately needed a second chance from his big brother. I read the email twice. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. I printed the email out, walked upstairs to the apartment where Marin was drinking tea, and placed the paper on the table in front of her. She read it carefully, her face completely unreadable. She looked up at me, took a sip of her tea, and simply said, "The ultimate decision is entirely yours, Silas. It is your blood. Whatever you decide, I am standing right beside you." So now, I am looking at that piece of paper sitting on my desk, and I am left with a massive, incredibly complicated question. A question I want to ask all of you watching this right now. Is there ever a genuine, authentic opportunity for a second chance when dealing with toxic family members? When someone who maliciously laughed at your absolute ruin and drank champagne while you were homeless suddenly hits rock bottom and begs for a mop, do you hand them the mop? Or do you permanently lock the door and let them face the brutal reality of the world they created? Let me know exactly what you think I should do in the comments below. I am reading every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching this story to the very end. If you have ever had to make the agonizing decision to cut off toxic family members to save your own sanity, please hit that like button and share your own experiences below. Do not forget to subscribe to the Payback Diaries for more incredible stories of ultimate karma and family revenge. Until next time, stay strong, protect your peace, and never let anyone treat you like an ATM.